Have you ever tried so hard to remember a specific word that your brain just completely short circuits?
Oh, absolutely. It's the worst feeling.
Right. You know the feeling. The word is right there on the tip of your tongue, and you're squeezing your eyes shut, demanding the vocabulary to appear. But I mean, the harder you push, the further away it
That's like
gets.
a mental wall.
Exactly. Then inevitably you give up, you step into a warm shower, your mind wanders to, what you're going to make for dinner, and boom, the
Ugh.
word just effortlessly pops into your head.
Yeah, that is actually the classic paradox of memory and cognition. It's so common. The sheer act of trying creates this neurological bottleneck.
A bottleneck.
Yeah, because when you strain to remember something, you're heavily engaging your brain's executive function. And that can actually suppress the more associative, relaxed networks where that memory is actually stored.
Oh, wow. So trying harder actually hurts you.
Exactly. The moment you step into the shower and let your mind wander, your brain shifts into what we call the default mode network. The pressure drops, the pathways open up, and, well, the information just flows naturally.
That makes so much sense. And today we're actually looking at a radical pedagogical theory that takes that exact shower logic and applies it to one of the most notoriously frustrating tasks on Earth, which is learning a new language.
It's a really fascinating approach.
It really is. We are diving into a really unique piece of source material for this deep dive. It's an English language learning guide, but the title alone tells you it is completely unlike any traditional textbook. It's called Stop Studying English, Fall in Love with This Heartwarming Story.
I love that title. The command to just stop studying sounds so counterintuitive. I mean, perhaps even a bit rebellious for an educational tool.
Yeah, definitely rebellious.
But beneath that relaxing premise, there is a deeply calculated, scientifically grounded strategy.
Which brings us to our mission for you listening today. We really want to explore this exact premise. We want to know if you can actually acquire real technical language skills, you know, grammar, syntax, vocabulary by turning off that anxious studying part of your brain and just letting a narrative wash over you.
It's a bold claim, for sure.
It is. And in the spirit of this source material, we are going to slow our own pace down today. We're going to keep the tone warm, relaxing, and immersive. So let's just settle in.
I think that's perfect, which actually mirrors the tone the source itself establishes right away. The narrator doesn't open with a syllabus or, a list of learning objectives.
Right, no boring bullet points.
Exactly. Instead, you're greeted by this calm, friendly voice that explicitly gives you permission to let go of your academic anxiety. The opening lines literally tell you that you're not going to study today, but rather you're simply going to listen to a beautiful story about kindness, family, and unexpected happiness.
And the narrator promises that while you're enjoying the story, your English will improve naturally. The explicit instructions are just to relax, listen carefully, and let the story begin. So let's unpack the psychology of that opening. Why does a language course start by actively discouraging the student from trying to learn?
Well, to understand the mechanics of this, we really need to look at the biological and psychological barriers to language acquisition. In linguistics, there is this foundational concept known as the affective filter.
The affective filter, okay.
Yeah, you can visualize it as an invisible psychological wall that goes up the moment a student feels stressed,
Right.
anxious, self-conscious, or honestly, even just bored.
Oh, like the feeling of staring at a blank test paper
Mhm.
or being called on unexpectedly in a high school language class?
Yes, exactly that feeling.
Yeah.
When you sit down with a dense grammar book and tell yourself that you must memorize 20 irregular verbs in the next hour, your body registers that pressure. Your cortisol levels rise. That spike in stress hormones triggers the amygdala, which is the brain's threat detection center. And that effectively shunts cognitive resources away from the prefrontal cortex, which is where complex learning and memory consolidation happen.
Wow, so you're biologically blocking yourself.
Literally, the affective filter goes up, and your brain is blocked from processing new linguistic input. You are in defense mode, not neuroplasticity mode.
That is wild. It's like educational reverse psychology. It reminds me of, lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, trying desperately to fall asleep.
Oh, that's a great comparison.
Yeah, you're actively commanding your body to sleep. Your heart is racing. You're checking the clock. You just cannot force it. But the second you stop trying, the second you just let your mind wander and accept being awake, you drift right off.
Right. The biological mechanism is incredibly similar. The source material wants the learner to drift into the language rather than aggressively attacking it.
Attacking it, yeah.
It systematically lowers the affective filter not just with reassuring words, but with the delivery itself. The audio component is specifically designed to be narrated at about 75 to 80% of normal conversational speed.
So it's very deliberate.
Very deliberate. The pronunciation is crystal clear, the rhythm is gentle, and there are these comfortable, deliberate pauses after important ideas. It really leverages a warm, deep vocal delivery to engage your parasympathetic nervous system, basically signaling to the brain that it is safe to absorb information.
Okay, I hear that, but honestly, part of me feels like this sounds like a bit of a gimmick. I mean, I understand the shower logic, and I completely agree that feeling relaxed is wonderful for your general mental health. But I have to push back here.
Sure, go ahead.
If I just sit around listening to a slow, cozy story about a grandmother, I might feel warm and fuzzy, but I'm not going to magically know how to conjugate verbs, right? I'm
Yeah.
not going to pass TOEFL exam. Where is the actual linguistic rigor here? Because vibes alone do not build technical fluency.
And that skepticism is entirely warranted. Really.
Mm.
If this were just a bedtime story, you would be absolutely right. It would be a feel-good exercise with minimal educational value.
Right.
But the narrative is not just a random collection of pleasant events. The story is actually a highly engineered delivery system for syntax and vocabulary. The rigor is completely hidden in the construction of the narrative itself.
Hidden how, exactly?
Well, it's designed to contextualize the language so deeply that the brain learns the grammar intuitively. It's much like how a child learns their first language, rather than through rote memorization.
Okay, let's look at that engineering, though. Let's look at how the story actually functions. So we are introduced to two friends, Emma and Jake, and Emma's grandmother. And the story opens with a very grounded, relatable scenario. Emma has just finished work, and she is feeling, quote, exhausted after one of the busiest weeks of her life.
Yeah, let's just pause on that word for a second. Exhausted. In a traditional textbook, you would get a flashcard. Side A says exhausted, side B says very tired.
Right, just a dry translation.
Exactly. You're forcing a direct, sterile translation. But the source provides a scenario that you, the listener, instantly recognize. We've all had those brutally busy weeks. You know, the physical sensation of leaving the office on a Friday with zero energy.
Oh, absolutely.
So your brain instantly maps your own lived experience of fatigue onto the English word exhausted.
So the emotional resonance gives the vocabulary a place to stick.
I love that.
So Emma decides she doesn't want to go straight home, so she calls Jake to see if he's free. And when she asks him, his response is brilliant. He doesn't say, yes, I am available.
Right.
He pauses and says, not really. Why?
And the authenticity of that dialogue is a crucial part of the methodology.
It really stands out because textbook dialogue is always so robotic and overly formal. It never sounds like two actual human beings talking. Jake's hesitation is exactly how friends speak to each other when they're, trying to figure out if they are about to be asked to help someone move a sofa.
Yeah, totally. And that authenticity is critical for the brain's attention filters. Evolutionary psychology tells us that the human brain is highly efficient at tuning out artificial or robotic speech.
Because it's not useful.
Exactly. It flags it as non-essential for real-world social survival. When you hear a stilted textbook dialogue, your brain subconsciously decides, well, nobody actually talks like this, so I don't need to remember it.
Wow, that's fascinating.
So by giving Jake a realistic initial hesitation, it signals to your brain that this is an authentic human interaction, which naturally commands closer attention.
Okay, so Emma explains she wants to visit her grandmother, who still makes the world's best cookies, but she adds this great humorous caveat. She warns Jake not to expect to eat too many because her grandmother is currently trying a new healthy recipe.
Such a great little detail.
Yeah, it's very cute. So Jake agrees to come, but before they leave, he makes a detour to a grocery store. And this is where the material really starts layering the vocabulary, right? He buys fresh apples, sweet oranges, and a small bouquet of flowers.
Yeah, and notice how the narrative is systematically binding sensory adjectives to emotional actions here. You aren't just reading a disconnected grocery list.
Right, it's painting a picture.
Exactly. Your brain is visualizing the bright colors of the fresh apples, imagining the scent of a sweet orange, and watching the physical act of Jake buying a bouquet as a token of gratitude for the grandmother's past kindness.
And Emma is surprised by the gesture and tells him he didn't have to buy all of that. But Jake insists, pointing out how kind her grandmother has always been to him. It creates a real emotional stake in the vocabulary word gratitude.
It really does.
You care about Jake's gesture, which makes you care about the words he uses to explain it.
And from a neurological standpoint, these sensory details act as structural anchors for memory. When you associate a new word with a vivid visual image, a smell, a sound, or a recognizable human behavior, you are building multiple neural pathways to that single piece of information.
So it's kind of like reinforcing a bridge.
Precisely. The more pathways you build, the easier the information is to retrieve later.
And the source leans heavily into those sensory pathways during the drive to the grandmother's house. It explicitly notes that Emma picks Jake up at exactly 5:45. The drive is peaceful, and there is soft music played in the background.
Right, and that auditory cue of soft music reinforces the overarching instruction to the learner's nervous system to remain relaxed. It sustains that low effective filter while the brain continues to absorb the environmental vocabulary.
Which brings us to the emotional peak of the story. So they arrive at the house. The grandmother slowly opens the door, and she is completely stunned. She says, "Jake, my goodness, I thought you had forgotten about me."
It's such a sweet moment.
It is. Jake gives her a warm hug and tells her he could never forget her. Tears fill her eyes, and then the text hits the listener with this massive sensory anchor. The house smelled like fresh cookies.
Olfactory imagery describing how things smell is uniquely powerful in memory formation. The olfactory bulb in the brain has a direct, unfiltered connection to the amygdala and the hippocampus.
Really? Unfiltered.
Yes, and those are the exact brain regions responsible for processing emotion and consolidating long-term memory. So even just reading or hearing a descriptive phrase about the smell of fresh cookies can trigger those memory centers, deeply embedding the surrounding English vocabulary right into your mind.
That is incredible. So they spend hours sitting together, drinking tea, sharing stories, and laughing about old memories. And when they finally stand up to leave, the grandmother hands Jake a small paper bag. Inside are still warm, homemade cookies.
A beautiful payoff to the earlier joke.
Yeah, the joke about the healthy recipe, but it is also just this pure exchange of kindness. Jake brought the flowers, she gives him warm cookies.
And the narrative pacing here is highly deliberate because after this emotional exchange, they step outside into the cool evening air. Jake suggests they take a walk in a nearby park rather than going straight home. They walk slowly beneath the trees, and the source highlights a very specific feeling. No phones, no stress, no rush, just conversation, fresh air, and gratitude.
It is the ultimate unplugged moment. Jake looks around and realizes that sometimes the happiest moments come from the simplest plans. Just a lovely thought to end on.
It is. And if we pull back and look at the cognitive journey here, the pacing of the narrative perfectly mirrors the psychological state the source is trying to induce in the learner.
How do you mean?
Well, we started with Emma being exhausted and stressed from a busy week, which is likely exactly how the learner feels when they sit down to study a foreign language. And we end with no phones, no stress, no rush. The story literally guides your nervous system from a state of high tension to a state of absolute calm.
And it is in that state of calm that the emotional resonance does its heavy lifting.
Precisely. The brain filters out millions of pieces of trivial data all day long just to keep from being overwhelmed. But it holds on to emotional resonance. When vocabulary is tied to universally understood feelings like nostalgia, gratitude, and unexpected joy, it signals to the brain that this information matters.
It flags it as important.
Yeah. The brain essentially says, this narrative made me feel something. Therefore, the language used to construct it is crucial for my survival and social connection.
Okay, so if a low effective filter and deep emotional anchors are the foundation, how do we transition from feeling relaxed to actually producing the language? I mean, a beautifully crafted story gets the vocabulary into the brain, sure, but at some point, the learner has to know how to use the phrase "drop by" correctly in a sentence. How does this methodology bridge the gap between passively enjoying a story and actively speaking English?
That is where we look at the pedagogical engine operating beneath the surface. The source material does not end when the story ends. It uses the narrative as a launchpad for structured, highly interactive language practice, moving you through a very specific cognitive progression.
So it doesn't just hand you a multiple choice quiz.
Far from it. The first step after the narrative is extracting the core vocabulary. But crucially, it does not teach these words in a vacuum. It focuses on phrasal verbs like pick someone up or look forward to, alongside evocative words from the text like bouquet, peaceful, homemade, and memories.
So they stay connected to the story.
Exactly. When the material reviews the word homemade, you aren't trying to memorize a dictionary definition. You're immediately recalling the image of the grandmother handing Jake the paper bag of still warm cookies.
Ah, the emotional anchor is already there. You're just attaching the technical syntax to it.
Exactly that. And from there, the material shifts to auditory scaffolding. You listen to the dialogues from the story played slowly first, and then at natural conversational speed.
Which builds a bridge between basic comprehension and real-world fluency. The slow version lets your brain process the articulation and the individual syllables without panicking. And then the natural speed trains your ear for how native speakers actually blur words together.
Right. And then the cognitive load is gradually increased through active recall. The material prompts you with comprehension checks, asking questions like, why was Emma tired? Or what surprised Emma's grandmother?
Okay, so testing your memory.
Yeah, but gently. This forces you to actively search those newly formed memory pathways and reconstruct the narrative sequence in English.
It transforms you from a passive consumer of a story into an active participant. And it pushes that even further by asking personal synthesis questions like, what would you do in the same situation? You're taking the vocabulary you just anchored to Emma and Jake, and you're immediately mapping it onto your own life and your own hypothetical choices.
And the pinnacle of this progression, however, is the final phase, which focuses on motor neuron activation through a technique called shadowing.
Oh, shadowing. This is where the source has the speakers take turns, leaving space for the listener to practice speaking aloud by stepping into the roles of the characters, right?
Yes, and shadowing is a transformative exercise for spoken fluency. You are physically producing the language. You are engaging the motor neurons in your mouth, your tongue, and your vocal cords.
It reminds me of learning your favorite song by singing along with the car radio. You know, you don't learn how to sing a song by sitting at a desk and staring silently at the sheet music.
No, of course not.
You learn it by mimicking the rhythm of the artist, matching the emotional tone, and singing it over and over at natural speed until the lyrics just become pure muscle memory.
That is a perfect analogy. When you are shadowing the dialogue between Jake and the grandmother, you are bypassing the translation phase in your brain. You aren't thinking about subject-verb agreement.
You're just in the moment.
Yeah. You're focused on the expression of the feeling. You are feeling Jake's genuine gratitude when you speak his lines. You are feeling the grandmother's joyful surprise. Because you are mimicking a scene you have already emotionally connected with, the grammar is absorbed implicitly as a byproduct of the emotion.
By the time you're doing this shadowing exercise, you've undergone a complete cognitive transformation. You started with passive, relaxed listening, moved through targeted vocabulary review, engaged in active recall, and arrived at physical vocal production. And because of the pacing and the narrative structure, you did it all without ever feeling the anxiety of studying.
It is honestly a masterclass in instructional scaffolding. The support starts incredibly heavy, a slow, relaxing story that does all the work for you and gradually, imperceptibly shifts the cognitive load onto you, culminating in autonomous speech.
So what does this all mean for you, the learner? The source material wraps up with a thesis that beautifully captures this entire philosophy. It tells you English isn't only about grammar. It's about stories, feelings, people, and moments you'll never forget.
It fundamentally reframes the nature of language itself. Language is not a math problem to be solved, nor is it a code to be cracked. It's a biological tool evolved for human connection. When you attempt to learn it through the lens of human connection, the brain adopts it far more willingly than when you treat it as an academic chore.
And the material encourages you to return to the story daily, noting that if you enjoyed the narrative, you should listen again tomorrow, and your English will become more natural with every pass. It leverages the pleasure principle. We naturally want to repeat experiences that make us feel calm, connected, and emotionally fulfilled.
Repetition is vital for neuroplasticity. But the framing changes everything here. It is not a command to review material for an impending test. It is an invitation to revisit a space that made you feel good.
Which brings us right back to where we started today. Remember that stubborn word stuck on the tip of your tongue, the one that only revealed itself when you finally stopped trying, when you let your affective filter drop under the warm water of the shower. Our brains are undeniably hardwired to remember stories and emotions far better than rules, flashcards, and formulas.
They absolutely are.
So here's a final thought for you to take away today, something to really mull over. If taking the pressure off and turning a lesson into an emotional story can unlock something as incredibly complex as acquiring a foreign language, What other difficult, frustrating skills in your life are you currently trying to force your way through? And what would happen if you stopped studying the hard way and found a way to fall in love with the story behind it instead?